Hello again, J-Spot peeps. Welcome back to the J-Spot. I'm your host, Mr. J. And for those of you who have subscribed thus far, thank you. For those of you who are stopping by for the first time, welcome. And if you enjoy this content while you are here, please give us a like. Please subscribe. And make sure you hit that notification bell. Drop us a comment. Share this content with your family and your friends. In today's video, I will be continuing the series My Country Used to Be, Part 2, when assimilation equals emasculation. Let's get right to it, shall we? In the last video, the first part of the series, I ended the video by saying, "Congratulations, America. You got what you wanted. Are you happy now?" And I said that because the entire video was talking about how we have been duped, Black Americans in particular, have been duped into thinking that because we have seen some changes along the way, that those changes equate to progress, when in fact they really do not. It just means that some things have changed. It's kind of like, cancer, and forgive me if I'm not trying to dismiss anyone's prognosis with cancer or diagnosis with cancer, but it's like the stages of that. Yeah, it's changing, but that doesn't mean it's getting better. And in a lot of ways, that's what discrimination and systemic racism has been in this country. There are stages of it, and things are changing, but that doesn't mean that the cancer is going away. Doesn't mean that discrimination and racism is going anywhere just because you can sit in Starbucks now, or you can sit in Applebee's and you won't be thrown out or have to go to the back of the bus anymore, or you don't have to be served out of a window unless it's your by choice because of the color of your skin. Doesn't mean that because you can sit in an Ivy League school, Yale, Harvard, but it doesn't mean that because you're sharing a cubicle with a white person at work, that things have actually changed or progress has been made. Some things have changed, but that doesn't mean there's been progress. See, progress means you're going forward. That's why when you hear people say reverse racism, what does that mean, really, when you break it down? Reverse racism means that they think you're going backwards. That progress, that because you're doing it to them, or they're feeling as though it's being put upon them, that we are somehow going backward. And so I say all that to say what I'm going to be speaking about today is this notion that the independence of Black women, not women in general, but Black women, has somehow means that the Black race as a whole is doing better. And so I'm going to be reading some excerpts from a couple of articles, particularly one by the late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, in which titled the Negro Family in the Case for National Action, a published paper he published in 1965, 60 years ago, in which the premise of the paper was the reason for the deterioration of the Black family and why Blacks were suffering then. And remember, 60 years ago, he researched this paper for at least a couple of years. So you figure 1963. But I want you to understand, I want you to listen to the things that are being stated here and understand and try to recognize how these things really haven't changed. They've changed, but not for the better. And if you recall, when I first started this series, which the premise of this series, which began with the Willie Lynch Manifesto, Willie Lynch and the pattern of learned behavior in the Black community, I talked about the ideology of Willie Lynch as it pertains to gaining control of the Black family. Now, his objective always was to make a slave, but he understood that he could not do that unless he emasculated the black male. And in order for him to do that, he couldn't emasculate the black male in front of white people because white people didn't give a damn about him anyway. The objective was to emasculate him within his own family unit, in his structure, in his community, specifically in front of the black woman. Because once he got a hold of the black woman, he got a hold of their offspring. And once he gained control of the offspring, the woman would instill into the child and her offspring the ideology that child had to be submissive and subservient to that white master, lest he die or lose his life. Because she understood, as Tahani P. Coates did in his book, The World Between the World and Me, when he was telling his son, we do not own our bodies, the government does. And it's evident now more so because Trump is disappearing people right off the street. So we're going to concentrate on that today and in the next couple of series. And also how social services wormed their way into the lives of black people to gain control of the family and to perpetuate the Willie Lynch ideology that in order for us to control them, we have to control the black female. And in order for us to control the black female, we have to emasculate the black man in her eyes. And we won't necessarily be the ones doing it. They'll do it themselves. As William Lynch said, self-generation and self-refueling. After a while, we won't have to do it because they'll do it themselves. Just because they think by doing it themselves, they're endearing themselves to white society. So let's begin. And I'm going to begin with Chapter 2 of late Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan's report, The Negro Family, the Case for National Action. Chapter 2 titled, The Negro American Family. At the heart of the deterioration of the fabric of Negro society is the deterioration of the Negro family. It is the fundamental source of the weakness of the Negro community at the present time. 1965 could be said, same could be said today, even more so. And I'll continue. There is probably no single fact of Negro American life so little understood by whites. The Negro situation is commonly perceived by whites in terms of the visible manifestation of discrimination and poverty, in part because Negro protest is directed against such obstacles, and in part, no doubt, because these are facts which involve the actions and the attitudes of the white community as well. It is more difficult, however, for whites to perceive the effect that 3 centuries of exploitation have had on the fabric of Negro society itself. Now think about that. Let's go back a minute. The Negro situation is commonly perceived by whites in terms of the visible manifestation of discrimination and poverty. In part, and I'll paraphrase the rest, because these are the things that Negroes protest about mostly. You know, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. If you're not complaining about your tooth, then the dentist is not going to say you got a toothache. If you're not complaining about discrimination and poverty, then white folks are going to assume that it's not there. And then there's also this, that they have no idea what the effect of 3 centuries of exploitation has had on the fabric of Negro society. In other words, it's like we hear Black people complain about profiling. Black people complain about police brutality. White people don't believe those things exist because it doesn't happen to them. They haven't been exploited in that fashion. It's like several years ago when the Supreme Court gutted the Civil Rights Act, and the Voting Rights Act, I'm sorry. And the reasoning behind that, according to John Roberts, Supreme Court Chief Justice, was, well, you got a black president now, so discrimination and voter suppression and all of those things, they must not exist anymore. Racism is a thing of the past. We got a black president. Doesn't mean a thing. And I'll go on. But here is where the true injury has occurred. Unless this damage is repaired, all the effort to end discrimination and poverty and injustice will come to little. The role of the family in shaping character and ability is so pervasive as to be easily overlooked. The family is the basic social unit of American life. And this was particularly true for black families in the 50s, 30s, 40s, post-Civil War, actually, up until the 70s. It is the basic socializing unit. By and large, adult conduct in society is learned as a child. Now think about that in relation to Willie Lynch's ideology of emasculating the black man and gaining control of the female so as to gain control of her offspring. Because, like it says right here, by and large, adult conduct in society, slave society, particularly for the purposes of this particular context, society in which slavery existed, adult slaves, their conduct amongst the masses and the white people in that society was learned as a child. You very seldom saw any or read any accounts of children trying to escape slavery. It was the adults who hadn't learned subservience and submissiveness. Their natural inclination for them to behave was to escape and seek their freedom, much like the apes in the cage that would go after the banana. So keep that in mind as we go forward. The role of the family in shaping character and ability is so pervasive as to be easily overlooked. The role of the family includes what? Mother, father, mother, child, husband, wife, child. That is a family unit. And the role of that family in shaping character and ability is what's so important. So if you gain control of the character of the family, in order to do that, you have to dismantle that family. And it goes back to one of the questions in part 2 of the series, William Lynch, and the pattern of learned behavior in the black community, where I posed the question, what family unit does the American social service system target more for dismantling? Black families or white families? And why? Stick a pin in that. Now, let's address some of the fundamentals of the American family in the United States. This is from Senator Moynihan's report about the Negro American family. A fundamental insight of psychoanalytic theory, for example, is that the child learns a way of looking at life in his early years through which all later experience is viewed and which profoundly shapes his or her adult conduct. The mass media and the development of suburbia have created an image of the American family as a highly standardized phenomenon. It is therefore easy to assume that whatever it is that makes for differences among individuals or groups of individuals It is not a different family structure. And that can be further from the truth. As it says, it's easy to assume that if you believe all family structure is the same, that everybody comes out of there with the same way of thinking when they leave their homes. That is not true. And while there is much truth to this, as with any other nation, Americans are producing a recognizable family system. There are still, for example, important differences in family patterns surviving from the age of the great European migration to the United States. And these variations account for notable differences in the progress and assimilation of various ethnic and religious groups. A number of immigrant groups were characterized by unusually strong family bonds. These groups have characteristically progressed more rapidly than others. Breaking it down, basically what he's saying is that the majority of ethnic immigration to this country, those immigrants were able to hold on to their cultural foundations and the things that brought them and bonded their cultures together in a collective sort of way. That was not true for Africans who were brought to this country. Africans brought to this country for purposes of slavery were stripped of their culture, their family foundations, and therefore were oppressed to a point where progress was not something that they could aspire to. And to add insult to injury, not only were their cultures and their history suppressed and stripped away from them, their families were dismantled in order to reinforce that oppression. And so I'll go on. But there is one truly discontinuity in family structure in the United States at the present time. Remember, it's 1965. That between the white world in general and that of the Negro American. The white family has achieved a high degree of stability and is maintaining that stability. By contrast, the family structure of lower class Negroes is highly unstable and in many urban centers is approaching complete breakdown. This was 1965. Ask yourself, what have you seen that's different in lower class urban communities today than as opposed to what he was talking about in 1965? Let's explore some of the reasons for that. In one of the videos that I did before, I talked about a conversation, an article titled Perspectives, the Status of African American Women by Dr. Julianne Malveaux, March 2008, in which she cited that since the 1980s, African American women head more than 40% of African American families, and the majority of African American children grow up in households headed by women. And on Senator Moynihan's report, he cited that almost 1/4 of Negro families were headed by females. This was 1965. 25% of all households, Negro households, were headed by females. And as a result of this high rate of divorce, separation, and desertion, a very large percent of Negro families were headed by females. While the percentage of such families among whites was dropping since 1940s, it was rising among Negroes. It was estimated in 1965 that only a minority of Negro children reached the age of 18, having lived all their lives with both of their parents. The breakdown of the Negro family has led to a startling increase in welfare dependency. 1965. Welfare dependency. Remember, 25% in 1965. By 2008, it was 40%. And by the 2020s, it was 75% of African American households being headed by single black women. And what do we see in that? Addressing the effects of single parenting among African American women on African American offspring, Dr. Malvo cited, while there is nothing inherently wrong with female-headed households, there is much sociological data that suggests that children who grow up in healthy, intact families, it is important to emphasize healthy, as violent or abusive intact families are not preferable to families headed by one parent. These children are less likely to be involved in violence and more likely to attend college and lead productive lives. Now, according to the opening quote by Lynch, desire for any change from the pigsty translates as productive. So how does self-refueling and house generation continue to orbit upon its axis if, in other words, a child that values meaningful family structure over one of dysfunction avoids criminal activity and strives to perpetuate function over chaos, over dysfunction? In other words, how will they control black children without first dismantling the family? And how do they dismantle the family without first emasculating the black man? And within the eyes of his wife, his partner, his community, and his children. How do they do that? And who do they use to do it? Thank you once again, J-Spot peeps, for spending some of your valuable time here with me in the J-Spot. And if you enjoyed this content, please subscribe. Please drop us a like. Drop us a comment. I'd love to know what you're thinking. And please come back to see me, because we have a lot more discovering to do and a lot more purpose to pursue. In the meantime, peace.